Good morning. This is Jason Dean. Hello, YouTubers and Facebook fiends, Film Fanatic Facebook fiends. Hope everyone's doing good. I've been watching a lot of movies, and I've been really thinking about this new series, and I decided to change things up. Originally, being this whole show or series is centered on the Halloween franchise. I've been revisiting all of the movies through the years that it's been going on. I started with the '78 one, the classic, the first one by John Carpenter, which changed the horror genre um, in every way. Kind of inspired a whole movement of filmmaking, basically. One of the greatest films ever. And so And about a month ago, I did a whole series on the Friday 13th franchise. I have a different thing with the Friday 13th franchise when I look at it at just face value and my first kind of impression of it. I kind of base a lot of things that I like and on my gut reaction or how if it takes me away, if a film, even, and the same thing as far as music goes. If it just, I don't try to intellectualize anything. I try to just feel if it resonates with me. If I think about it, if I see a film and I think about it the next day, or I talk about it the next day, or the next few days, and it's something, and then I have this feeling like, wow, I would like to see that again or listen to this again, and it's like based on just like kind of a gut reaction, more of a like a primal thing, just like how my body or my mind reacts. That's usually like how I base something on that I tend to like, or that I tend to become a real big fan of, especially if it's something I haven't seen before. And I just, I obviously nostalgia is a part of it too. Like a lot of the films that I've reviewed on this channel and on my pages are films, that I more or less kind of grew up on, in my youth. But so there's definitely part of like a nostalgic thing to it. Case in point with the Friday 13th series. But I realized, like, when I did that series with the Friday 13th series and I watched every movie in succession, I felt like it was still resonating, even though I'm definitely tied to that series because it was a really fun product of my childhood. I felt like it still had that great fun escapist aspect to it, and it kind of felt like I was going to a party that I didn't really want to leave. It just had that entertainment value. So it's always been my favorite franchise. And then before I did the Friday 13th show, I did a show on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. And I started out as doing a thing where I was going to do the same thing. Originally, I was going to do that, a full review of all the films. But then I realized there's a lot of the films in the series I'm not a huge fan of, and it wasn't quite the same thing. I don't have that connection to all the other films. Some of them are good, but I really don't have. And there's a lot of films in that series, and a lot of the films I felt were things I felt I wouldn't really want to watch again, or they just didn't resonate with me in the same way. With the exception of like three films that I do really love in that series. As a whole, the franchise itself is something I'm pretty detached to. The first Texas being my favorite of all time, and that's, you know, easily one of my top, it's definitely on my top 10 list as one of my favorite horror films of all time. And also, I really love part two. I think that's really great. And then when I was trying to set up the series for that, I rediscovered the remake that came out, and I really, actually really loved that movie. I was really impressed with it. It was very different and interesting, and and it felt fresh. But the rest of the films, I kind of still felt the same way. I wasn't drawn to them the same way. So what I tend to do, typically what I tend to do on this show is it's a matter of taste. We all have different tastes. We all have different interests and whatever. I try to be respectful of films that I don't necessarily even really like, or even films that I kind of consider to be just kind of trash. I try to be respectful of it, but I can still be critical and make an observation of the film for good or bad, and try to be fair. And I just felt as a whole I didn't have that resonation with that entire franchise as I did, say, with Friday 13th. So I ended up scrapping that idea, and I just did basically the one movie. And eventually I'll do a couple more movies. I'll do shows on a couple of other films in the that are connected to Texas. Part two, which I really love, and then also the reboot. So, but as a whole, I'm not going to do it. But Friday 13th, I did the entire list. And I was going to also do the same with the Halloween franchise. And I finished up pretty much all of the films in the franchise. And I realized kind of the same thing happened. I feel a little bit more connected to the entire franchise of Halloween than I do to the franchise as a whole of Texas. But it's kind of the same thing. I feel like it's a lot of movies, it's a lot of time, And then after I watched all the films, there was like one I had not seen yet. I did see it originally, but when it came out, but it's been many years. But after I finished up all of the films pretty much in succession the last week or so. I kind of had the same feeling where I wasn't like too excited about doing a review of the entire series because it's a lot of time, and to a degree it's a lot of work. And the Film Fanatic thing is a pure passion project. If at some point I can turn it into more of a maybe a business, that would be great, and grow upon it. But it's a passion project, and it's just about me talking about films that I generally really love and care about. So I decided to change the route of what I was going to do and what I'm doing with this new series on Halloween. So I've decided to just focus on the films that I still think about and make me excited. And I thought, wow, okay, this is fresh, or this is exciting, and this is something I want to watch again. And I'm just basing it on that. So I decided to basically not do all of the films in the franchise. It's interesting too. I recently watched a movie called Terrifier, and I'll probably not going to do a review on it, but I recently watched a film called Terrifier. I watched two new films. Terrifier came out in 2016, but I kind of consider it a newer kind of slasher film. And then I watched this other film called Atrium, which was a movie that came out, I think, in 2017 or 16. Another horror film, kind of a modern horror film. And so when I watched Atrium, I really wasn't sure if I was digging it. I wasn't really sure if I was kind of being pulled in. I watched it, and I got to about to the hour point of the film, and the movie's about an hour and a half, and I wasn't almost about to check out. I was almost gonna I'm not sure if I can finish this movie. I'm not sure really if all the dots are connecting, and if there is really a story, or if there is something that these characters are trying to say, or that this director is trying to say. I thought visually it was really interesting and very cool, but then the aesthetics around it were very interesting, and I love that it was shot. It's a modern film, but I love that it was shot it was basically made to look like an old 70s kind of grindhouse film. And I really love that aspect of it, because that's my favorite, pretty much my favorite genre. Particularly in the horror world. And I ended up almost checking out. And then I was like, well, I should give this a chance. And then I got to the second late, or to the second act of the film, towards the end of the second act, and some things happened in the film where I really was like, huh, interesting. I found myself digging it, and I found myself being pulled into it, and then I was like kind of hooked, and then I finished it, and I was like, you know what, that was a really interesting experience, and it was something about the whole atmosphere and the aesthetics and the whole vibe of the film that just kind of resonated with me. It wasn't necessarily a very gory film, but it just had this really interesting kind of retro, but yet giving you something new as far as the aesthetics and the vibe of the film and the atmosphere that it created. So I just found that it resonated with me, and I've been like thinking about it since I watched it. So I'll probably do a review on that because it's a pretty interesting film. It's a movie that's probably not for everyone, but I'm all about. I mean, again, I'm a huge slasher fan. Slasher movies are, pretty much my jam. I love copious amounts of gore, but I also feel like there still has to be a pretty good story, and it really has to have the atmosphere. It has to have this atmosphere of where you can kind of almost taste it. So I usually base that on a thing where I think of a movie, say like Maniac, Bill Luswig's classic slasher film from the '80s, which is one of my all-time favorite slasher films. And I think that's a perfect example of like the quintessential slasher film. That movie it's incredibly violent, it's incredibly gory, and there's moments of that film where it's very disturbing and really unsettling. But it's also kind of a fun movie. It's an exploitation movie, but and it has this real, it's super uber low budget, and it's really raw, it's really gritty, and the violence and the gore in the film are pretty extreme and really over the top. But say compared to like movies that are quote unquote labeled as like torture porn, where basically every scene in the film is about somebody, getting a limb ripped off and blah blah blah. And usually, what tends to happen with films, I think, in that field, is like I'm a huge fan of gore and over the top violence, but what tends to happen with this whole kind of thing that's kind of labeled as like torture porn is that, well, the atmosphere is not there, the characterization's not there. There's not really a story. It doesn't really. It's not really saying anything. It's not really taking you anywhere. And I think if you took away the gratuitous violence, the film would be really flat because it's kind of relying on that to sell the movie, and that's really about it. And so when I brought up the example of Maniac, a movie that is incredibly violent, incredibly gory and disturbing. But the thing about that film is it's got some great characters. It's got a really great story. It can be completely straight ahead and generic, but if it's told well, it doesn't matter. I feel like, well, like Halloween, I mentioned Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween. One of the most straight ahead, simple plot line storylines that's ever been conceived. But the atmosphere is so rich and dense and so haunting that's what makes it a classic. And with Maniac, it's that same kind of thing. If you took away the violence and you took away the disturbing nature of the film, it would still be a ride. Like, it would still be something that would be, I feel like, would pull you in because it just has this atmosphere to it and this grittiness and this tension behind it, and some really great acting and some really great and a good story. Pretty straightforward, but it's still told very, very well. So I think that's like an obvious difference. So I watched this movie Terrifier, and it's a movie that's been really talked about a lot, and also because the second one has just come out, Terrifier 2. And it's about essentially this guy, Art, this killer clown who basically goes around massacring, people and torturing people and, everything you can, conceive of under the sun as far as murderous rage. And I kept hearing about it, and I've heard of, because the second one just came out. Terrifier 2 just came out recently, and it's super low budget film, but it's made a lot of money, and it's really kind of become this major film now in the underground, quote unquote underground kind of indie horror circuit. And I've never seen either of those. So like the other night I watched Terrifier, and I was, I watched it and I did enjoy it. I was really blown away. The violence in the film is so over the top and so like surprising. It's not necessarily shocking. I mean, there's one scene in the film where it's pretty shocking, but it was surprising. Like, wow, they really went there. They went all the way. They were going to they showed what you thought they weren't going to show, and it's uber violent, and it's so over the top. And I'm a fan of gore, like I said, and I found myself kind of enjoying the film. And then after I finished it, I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna watch the second one tonight or whatnot. It piqued my interest to watch the second one, and then so I watched it, and then a few hours, a day or so went by after I watched it, and I found myself not really caring about the film. I felt like it kind of was forgettable, and I felt like it wasn't something that was resonating with me. It wasn't something that I was craving to see again. I wasn't really thinking about it. The violence and everything was so over the top, and I guess critics of that film sometimes call it like basically a torture porn film, and I guess that's kind of accurate, to a degree. Um, when I think of movies that I really love, like say Maniac and all the films that came out in the '70s and '80s, all the great giallo horror, Italian horror exploitation movies, and all the great movies that came out in this, the '70s and '80s. All the great American horror exploitation movies they're pretty violent movies, like my Bloody Valentine or the Two Box Murders, Maniac, and any of the films even before that, like Hersch and Gordon Lewis, where they're really gory, but they're still all about the atmosphere. I feel like those films, they create this vibe. It's like something you could almost taste, and it has a generally good characterization of the story of the characters, but it has a resonation about it where, aside from the gore, it still kind of works, I feel. And I felt like with Terrifier is that same kind of thing of where if you took away all of the gore, and it's extreme. I mean, there's beheadings and people get caught, literally chopped in half, and they show everything. And I kind of felt after I watched it and I sat with the film for a while, I kind of felt like it was a thing of where if you took away those aspects of the film, it really didn't have anything else to it. It didn't really have the atmosphere. It didn't really have the characterization that was, necessary or is necessarily strong enough to kind of make you really care what's going on. There really wasn't a story, and to a degree, there really wasn't any tension. Like, and without knocking the filmmakers, because I think they put some love into the film, and I think they're definitely talented. The actor who played the Art the Clown is a pretty interesting, cool character. But I just felt like there wasn't. I felt like because of the other aspects, which I feel for a film to be good, all of those things were not really there, so they were making up for that film by the gratuitous violence. They were trying to like cover their tracks to sell, like that's the selling point. We might not have all these other things, but like let's make it as gory as humanly possible, and that's what we'll sell it on. And I feel like that's what they did. If you took away those elements, the movie would be pretty flat, and there wasn't really any atmosphere behind it. So I just kind of forgot about the movie. And I know it's this big thing now, and then the second one has just come out. I haven't seen it, and I've heard the people that seem to love Terrifier, and from what I've read, say that this movie is amazing, blah blah blah. But it's basically, like just like Terrifier, but turned up even more. I don't know. I maybe I'll see it, maybe I won't. But based on the kind of the story of where this thing has emerged, I'm not really excited about seeing it. But so I felt like with the difference is like when I compared Maniac by Bill Luswig to the old school slasher exploitation movie compared to this newer one, there there is a huge difference. For me personally, there's not as much atmosphere, and there's not. It's not really saying all that much. If you took away the gore and the gratuitous violence, it would be kind of flat. The one cool thing I thought about Terrifier is, yeah, some of the violence is pretty gnarly and kind of impressive, but it's kind of made to be a film, like a tribute to a lot of those older films. But I feel like in the department of, again, like I said, the characterization, the story, and creating a dense atmosphere that pulls you in, and having a little bit of restraint about things. A little bit of the idea of less is more. So when you do have a shocking scene, it really has an impact. Terrifier doesn't have that. It's really everything is on screen coming at you. So it's not really leading you into that spot, to that path. So it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing when I process something after I've seen it, and you kind of like, okay, how are you reacting? Is it something you're still thinking about? Is it resonating with you? Blah blah blah. And I just base it on kind of a gut reaction. I don't try to think about it per se. So that brings me to this making that caused me to basically make the decision not to like review every Halloween movie. Just basically talking about the movies I really love. The first one, amazing, iconic movie by John Carpenter. The second one, pretty good. I think it's a pretty good follow up and a storyline. Not as good as the first one. Obviously, it doesn't have that same strong atmosphere as the first one, but it's still good. I think it's still something you could watch in succession. But and then I did a show. I did a show on both of those movies, and then I did a show about Season of the Witch Part 3, which is an amazing movie. I think it's one of my favorites. It might be my favorite in the entire franchise, even though it's not necessarily tied to the franchise, but it's so different and interesting, and it's kind of its own thing. And it's bonkers crazy, and it's super gory, but it's a great story, and it's more of a science fiction movie. It's very very different, but it just has this great atmosphere to it, and it just is something that I crave to be in and create, and it's something I crave to see again. So as I've been watching all these movies again, a lot of them I hadn't seen before. Well, I have seen all of them before, but I haven't seen most of them in many, many years. So the last one I watched that I really was impressed with was Halloween H20. It's basically the Halloween at that point, and it came out in 1998. It was at that point the reboot to the series, basically the continuation. And it was directed by Steve Miner, and I was really, really impressed with this movie. Again, like I was talking about before, it really had such a great atmosphere to it. And I feel like it was just a fun ride. Like, one of the things I feel like the newer Halloween films, particularly, I'm going to do a review on the last Halloween Ends. I just saw that in the theater. I'm going to do a review on that. And that movie was kind of very, very different and very interesting in some ways, and not what I expected. But as a whole, I think the last three movies, especially with Halloween, they're they were really they're really serious, and they're not like, they take themselves so uber serious that it has this feeling of like, to a degree, the filmmaker's head is up their own butt, and it becomes, they're trying so many things. They're trying to have all introduce all these characters or bring back all these characters and try to incorporate different storylines, subplots, maybe incorporate some kind of political thing or social political thing. But they try to make it real and they try to take it really seriously. And it feels like for what that franchise is it's like kind of an epic fail. Like they're not very fun movies. They're really they're kind of convoluted and kind of messy. Aspects of those films, Halloween and Halloween and Halloween Kills, are pretty interesting. But the things that they talk about or bring about as far as storylines, because they try to make these things more complicated than they are, they don't really follow through to a degree. And it's kind of the same old stuff. It's kind of the same thing over and over again. But it's real heavy-handed. It's not. It loses its entertainment value. I think something can have a balance. But these are slasher movies, and it should have that aspect. Give you something new and exciting, but it should still have an entertainment value where it's taking you away and you're escaping for a period of time. And it felt like the newer ones don't really have that. They're just uber serious, and they're everything is like out in the open, and there's so much so many ideas on the screen that are just presented and they're not really executed. Um, and it's whereas like say the Friday 13th franchise, like I feel like yeah, they're pretty bad and they're pretty cheesy, but they're still fun. They're fun movies. They don't take themselves that seriously. And in the series itself, there's a lot of new, I think, creative things that were made, and where they really took some chances to a degree. But it's still fun. It has that thing of like their heads are not up their own ass about, well, we got to make it about this social political thing, or we need to make it really contemporary, and it's got to reflect these values or where we are as a society, and we got to like bring back characters we haven't seen in 20 years, and we got to like write a storyline for them and blah blah blah, and present every now and then a few good ideas but not really follow through with them. I feel like that's what happens to the new ones, but they're serious, and it's hard to do. But H2O, I was really impressed. um, and it was directed by Steve Miner, who was responsible for Friday 13th Part 2 and also Part 3, which is amazing. He directed Warlock, which is a really cool movie. Lake Placid, which is actually a pretty good movie. Day of the Dead. Um, so that was pretty cool. I didn't realize that was Steve Miner. And Steve Miner, he directed Part 3 of Friday 13th, which is awesome. And this movie is fantastic. Like, it's super fun. I thought it was really um, an exciting adventure. I felt like great kills. It's got a lot of tension. Janet Leigh is in it, which is amazing, along with Jamie Lee Curtis, who Janet Leigh famous from the original Psycho. And there's one of the most amazing, and I feel like this film is a really great kind of love letter to horror films. I feel like it's got one of the most amazing scenes as far as like in regards to like somebody tipping the hat to somebody, or tipping the hat about a director. And there's this amazing scene in the film with Janet Leigh where they pay tribute to the Alfred Hitchcock's The Shining, and it's just amazing. And it's like really brief, it's really short, but it's like really powerful. And it's like the filmmaker Steve Miner was like obviously tipping his hat to them, and it's just amazing, amazing stuff, wonderful stuff. So I highly recommend this film. It's one of the best in the franchise, Halloween H2O. So this is Jason Dean. So thank you again, and we'll see you soon.